Their names were John and Mary, and they lived in a little white frame house with a picket fence all around the front lawn. They owned a fin-tail car and a TV set with a 21-inch screen and a power mower and a freezer. John went bowling once a month on Thursday nights, and Mary subscribed to 3 of the Better Women's magazines and a cutout of all the recipes. They had been married for 14 years now, and in every respect they were a typical middle-class American couple. So naturally enough, John wanted to kill Mary. In John's defense, it must be stated that he was perfectly willing to put up with most of his wife's little ways. He did not object to her pin-curled presence at the breakfast table. He even tolerated her habit of using baby talk when she addressed the canary. And he looked the other way when she used his electric shaver on her legs. But there was just this one thing he couldn't endure. One crime he could not forgive. Mary was getting too fat. She had begun putting on weight a few years after they were married. The big day, the blushing and thin bride. 8 years ago, pleasingly plump. 6 years ago, struggling with her weight. 3 years ago, she was fat. Dr. Applegate warned her about her high blood pressure and the strain on her heart. But these things only seemed to make Mary more nervous. So of course, she ate. John didn't bother to talk about it anymore. He knew it wouldn't do any good. She was fat as a pig. That's when John began to have dreams about butchering hogs. It took something out of the ordinary to bring him to the actual point of murder. Her name was Frances. She was only extraordinary in John's eyes. He saw her slimness and was dazzled. And he had frequent opportunities to be dazzled because Frances was Mary's best friend. Neither John nor Frances realized that they were embarking on an affair. One does not associate passion with middle-aged pharmacy proprietors or with private secretaries who keep rubber plants in the office. John and Frances wanted Mary out of their lives, so Frances decided to be devious and hint to her friend that there was something she ought to know.
I know John has been restless. My wife can always tell, but we've always been close for so many years. I have no intention of leaving him, now or ever. Let him have his fling, poor dear.
So Frances had to push even more and ask what would happen if John demanded a divorce.
He wouldn't do anything like that. He just couldn't. But if he did, he'd be sorry, believe me. I'd get everything I've got coming to me.
So divorce was out.
The way the old sow is going now, she'll eat herself to death in a few years.
A few years? I can't go on like this. It isn't right. It'd be different if she felt anything for you, but she doesn't. To Mary, you're just property. Another household appliance. Something she owns. A convenience that supplies her with food and shelter and performs menial chores around the house for her comfort. You're a druggist. Isn't there something you could give her that...
I won't lie to you. I've been thinking about that too. But it wouldn't work just because I'm a pharmacist. There aren't any drugs that will do the trick without detection. At least nothing I could get out of stock here. And I couldn't order anything special or obscure without accounting for it.
All right, but you've got to do something. I can't take much more of this. In fact, I'm going away.
You're going away?
Don't be alarmed, darling. It's just a vacation. There's an aunt and uncle of mine out in Portland. They've asked me to visit them, and I've got 2 weeks vacation.
When?
Next week. I've got a plane reservation for Monday.
But that means I won't be seeing you again. Not for almost 3 weeks.
Maybe longer. Darling, I meant what I told you. I can't stand living with this way any longer. It's up to you now.
But I can't.
You must. I don't care if you hit her over the head with a club and lock her in the deep freeze. All I know is that I've had it. Either find some way out for us soon, or this is the end.
From that moment on, John thought of nothing else, only how to rid himself of Mary. He could cut her brakes, but he didn't know anything about cars. He could hire a killer, but he didn't have that much cash. He could help her eat herself to death. But that would take too long. John kept thinking about ways of killing her. 100 ways, but none of them were any good. One Sunday it came to him, just like that. It had been there all the time. Not obscure poisons, not undetectable poisons, of course. A physician would examine Mary's body before writing out a death certificate. But there wouldn't be any trouble because the physician would be Dr. Applegate. And Applegate, in addition to being the family doctor, was the man who had come to John when he needed some extra, but also extra-legal prescriptions for narcotics. Now, he would come to John's aid in his hour of need. All that remained to be considered was the exact modus operandi to employ. John thought about it all that day in the store. John decided upon the simplest toxic agent of all, the old standby of Borgia and Bourgeois alike, plain arsenic. Administration of the dosage would be no problem either. He'd put it into some chocolates. There was always the off chance that Mary, after swallowing a piece of the candy, would manage to get to the telephone before collapsing. And even then there was this little risk. She would either call him or Dr. Applegate. He knew how to react. And as for Applegate, John intended to have a chat with him this evening. He had a little difficulty with Applegate. The only really messy part of the entire business was in actually introducing the poison into the candy. There were so many things he hadn't anticipated, like opening the box itself and removing the plastic wrapper without damage, carefully cutting away the chocolate coating, removing a portion of the creamy fondant to make room for the poisonous powder, remelting the chocolate and smoothing it over. In the morning, he rose and shaved and dressed, and Mary had his breakfast ready as usual. She made him normal pretense of passing up the meal.
This coffee and orange juice, that's not for me today.
But he knew she'd fry herself the usual 3 eggs as soon as he was out the door. And when at the door, he produced a box of chocolates as an afterthought. She could not conceal her squeal of delight.
For me?
Hogs always squeal. Escape! Today was the day he would really escape. Before the afternoon was over, John was thinking of escaping the store itself by 5 o'clock. He wanted to get home and get it over with. So he drove home, as usual, at 5:30, parked the car at the driveway and went inside. John tiptoed through the hall. He saw her then, slumped in the big chair. She had to be dead.
Early tonight, aren't you? John, what are you staring at?
Where are the chocolates I brought you?
Surprise! I didn't eat any of them. Remember that new diet I told you about? Well, this time I'm sticking to it. I was telling Frances.
Frances?
Yes, Frances, silly. She stopped by here this afternoon on her way to the airport. And since she was going a trip, I gave her the box of candy to eat on the plane.
You gave her?
Sure. I figured it was sort of a farewell present.